When my son got married, I kept quiet about the $5 million my late husband left behind. It was the wisest decision I ever made, because just a few days later, his new wife showed up at my door with a lawyer. I was still standing beside my husband's casket, Augusto's casket, when I realized my life had just split into two halves, before and after. It wasn't just the pain of losing the man who had been by my side for 42 years of marriage. It was the sharp, physical sense that something much larger was collapsing, something I couldn't yet name. The funeral was crowded with people I knew and faces I didn't. There were employees, partners, and neighbors, those who had worked at the gas stations Augusto owned across Texas. Among them stood my son, Thomas, in an ill-fitting black suit, eyes red and swollen. Beside him was her Isabella, straight, shiny hair, thin, high heels, light but calculated makeup. She held Thomas's hand with a kind of firmness that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't affection, it was possession. They had only known each other for 8 months. I knew almost nothing about her. As people passed the casket one by one, murmuring hollow condolences, I noticed Isabella never once looked at my husband or at me. Her gaze moved around the room, over the expensive wreaths, the business cards attached, the way the funeral staff moved like she was already calculating something. When the crowd began drifting toward the other room for coffee, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. It was Richard Foster, Augusto's private attorney for over 30 years. His hair was gray now, gold-rimmed glasses perched on a serious face. "Mrs. Mary, I need a word with you." We walked to a quiet corner, away from the curious stares. He handed me a thick envelope sealed with red wax. My name, Mary, was written in my husband's strong handwriting. "He asked me to give this to you personally," Richard said. "He told me it was important, and that you'd understand why." My heart began to race. I took the envelope, feeling its weight, not just paper, but secrets, responsibility. "What is it?" I asked. Richard lowered his voice. "It's the full will, and a personal letter he wrote 3 months before he passed. He knew his time was short and asked me to protect you." I went home in a daze, a kind of shock no painkiller could soothe. Thomas offered to stay the night, but I refused. The look in Isabella's eyes when I said no, it was probing, measuring. I needed to be alone. I locked the door and turned on the light in Augusto's study, the air still smelling faintly of leather and old tobacco. I opened the envelope. The letter was on top, and the first few lines made me collapse into his chair. "Mary, my love, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say it while I was alive. I've left you an estate I quietly built over many years, $5 million in real estate, business holdings, and investments. But more important than the money, I leave you a warning. Be careful. Not everyone around you loves you for who you are. Some have already sensed the wealth and will try to take it from you. Trust Richard, and trust your instincts. You are stronger than you think." My hands trembled so badly I had to set the letter down. $5 million. I had always known Augusto did well, but that number was beyond anything I imagined. I read through the will again and again. 12 gas stations, several old land purchases, real estate investments, and a farm in Oklahoma, all under the name of a company I had never even heard of. Every line listed me as the sole heir. Thomas's name was also there, but one clause made my blood run cold. If my son marries within 2 years of my passing to someone with financial motives, he will receive only 8% of the total estate upon reaching 40 years of age. The remainder shall remain under the lifelong management of my wife, Mary, who will determine distribution based on his maturity and integrity. Augusto had known. Somehow, he had known. I sat in his old leather chair, holding the bronze box engraved with grape leaves, the one that held our wedding photo inside. Me in a simple white dress, him with his tie slightly crooked, smiling softly. I cried until there were no tears left and decided I would keep this secret to myself. There was something in Isabella's look at the funeral and in her subtle questions about Augusto's businesses that told me she knew more than she was letting on. 3 days after the funeral, Thomas called. His voice was strange, detached. "Mom, Isabella was wondering if you plan to sell the house. She works at a bank. She could help you get a loan for a smaller place." A chill ran down my spine. "Why would she ask that, Thomas?" "Mom, she's just worried about you. The house is too big for you alone." No, that wasn't concern. It was calculation. And I knew the fight had just begun. 3 months after the funeral, Thomas announced he was getting married. I should have seen it coming. But mothers always think they know their children, that love can pierce through deception. I was wrong. One evening, Thomas showed up unannounced with Isabella beside him. I was making coffee, something I still did every day, even though no one was left to share it with. "Mom, sit down. I need to tell you something." His tone was unnervingly formal. "We've decided to get married," Isabella said, adjusting her work dress, smiling politely. "Married? You two haven't even known each other a year," I said. 9 months, she corrected, her voice smooth as silk. "When you meet the right person, why wait?" I looked at my son, searching for the boy who used to be afraid of the dark, the one who cried in my arms when our dog died. All I saw was a distant man. "Mom, I'm 35, not a kid." His voice was cold. Isabella placed her hand on his. "Mrs. Mary, I understand your concern, but after what happened with Mr. Augusto, we want to cherish the time we have." She had just used my husband's death to justify a rushed marriage. I asked when the wedding would be. "Next month," she answered immediately. "A small ceremony, just family and close friends." I nodded, forcing composure. I offered to pay for the wedding, but she smiled and declined, saying everything was already arranged. Then she began asking too much. "Did Mr. Augusto have life insurance, Mrs. Mary? What about the gas stations?" I felt a shiver run through me but kept my tone calm. "He left me this house and some savings, that's all." I saw disappointment flicker in her eyes. From then on, Isabella was constantly around. Sometimes she brought wedding magazines, sometimes she came to measure the living room for guests, or borrowed Thomas's old photo albums. But what she was really doing was snooping, studying every object, every drawer. "Mrs. Mary, has the inheritance paperwork been filed yet?" "Not yet. Those things take time." "You should hurry, or it might cause trouble." "I work at a bank, I know how these things go." "I have my own lawyer, Augusto's lawyer," I said. Her smile froze. The wedding happened 3 weeks later. A small church ceremony, a simple reception at a hall. Isabella looked beautiful, undeniably, but it was a cold beauty. When I asked about her family, she said her mother lived far away and couldn't come. But then her mother, Susan, appeared midway through the reception, holding a glass of champagne, smiling sharply. "So you're Isabella's mother-in-law? Nice to meet you. My daughters told me so much about you," she said, her tone oddly pointed. "Losing your husband so suddenly must have been hard. Now that Thomas is married, I suppose you're planning to live alone in that big house, right?" I smiled faintly. No, I'm not planning to go anywhere, she chuckled. Well, life is unpredictable. Sometimes selling, downsizing, living simpler, it's not such a bad thing. Her words cut like a knife. That was the moment I knew my husband's warning had come true. She leaned closer, voice low but clear. Especially when inheritance is involved, these things can get messy, you know. Better to handle it early. The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. They knew. I didn't know how or when, but they knew. I looked across the room where Thomas was laughing at something a friend said, but the smile never reached his eyes. Isabella clung to his arm, and her mother stood beside me, as if she could smell blood in the air. That night, back in my empty house, I held Augusto's bronze box to my chest and whispered to his photo, "You were right. You were right about everything." And that same night, I decided if they wanted to play, I would learn the rules. But I would. Play to win, because they had no idea who they were dealing with. Still, I had no idea how far they were willing to go. A few days later, I learned just how ruthless Isabella could be. On Monday morning, I was sitting in Augusto's office, polishing the bronze box with a soft cloth. It was the only thing that calmed me. Its weight in my hands, the way the light hit the metal, and the photo inside it made me feel he was still there, reminding me to be strong. The house was silent in that suffocating way of someone not yet used to living alone. I had just poured myself coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, my stomach twisted. Isabella, and she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a man in a gray suit holding a briefcase, his posture stiff and professional. I opened the door slowly. "Hello, Mrs. Mary," Isabella said, smiling that smile. "Sorry for coming unannounced, but this is important. This is Mr. David Collins, my attorney." My heart raced, but I kept my expression calm. "What is this about?" The man stepped forward, shaking my hand cold, calculated. "Mrs. Mary, I'm an estate lawyer. Mrs. Isabella hired me to address matters regarding Mr. Augusto's assets." "Matters? Assets?" I repeated, each word like a blade hanging in the air. "I don't understand what matters." Isabella walked straight into the house without being invited, the lawyer following. My hands trembled as I shut the door. "Shall we sit and talk?" she said, already seated on the sofa, crossing her legs, dabbing her mouth with a napkin as if she were performing. The lawyer opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of papers stamped and official, the smell of old ink filling the air. "Mrs. Mary," he said, "I'm here to deliver the formal notice regarding the division of the late Mr. Augusto's estate." The words "division of the estate" hit like an explosion in the quiet room. "My husband's been gone less than 4 months. The process hasn't even started," I said. "That's exactly why we're here," Isabella replied smoothly. "Mrs. Mary, we understand you're grieving and not thinking about paperwork. So, I came to help. Thomas has the legal right to half his father's assets, that's the law." "Does he know you're here?" I asked. Isabella glanced at the lawyer. He cleared his throat. "Yes, Thomas is aware and has authorized us to proceed. My son, my only child, had sent a lawyer to his mother's house 1 week after his wedding." "Proceed with what?" I asked, my voice cracking. The man began to read, monotone and detached. "Under state law, the legal heir has the right to request disclosure of all assets, including properties, bank accounts, investments, and shares belonging to Mr. Augusto. You have 15 business days to provide full documentation. Failure to comply will result in legal action." 15 days? I repeated. And if I refuse? Isabella sighed, as if speaking to a child. Mrs. Mary, this isn't about refusing or agreeing, it's the law. Thomas has rights. And you? She smirked. You're older now. You don't need to hold on to so much. A smaller home, a simpler life, it might do you good. I couldn't believe her audacity. I won't hand over anything until I speak to my lawyer. Of course, Mr. Collins said, placing the papers on the table. This is the official notice. You have 15 business days. Otherwise, we'll have to take the matter to court. Court, a polite way of saying they would drag me there. Isabella stood, smoothing her dress, picking up her purse. She ran her fingers along the old wooden cabinet one Augusto had brought home from an auction 20 years ago. Lovely antique, she said. Must be worth quite a bit. Anyway, all of this will need to be appraised too. She was appraising my entire life with her eyes. When they left, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the floor, the papers falling across my lap. How did she know? How did she know about Augusto's assets? He had been so private, even longtime employees didn't know everything. I hadn't known until after he died, but Isabella knew, and not just knew, she knew the exact amount. She had hired a lawyer, planned everything, prepared her move. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the phone and called Thomas. It took 5 calls before he finally answered. Thomas, did you send a lawyer to your mother's house? A long pause. Mom, it was Isabella. She said we should handle the inheritance sooner rather than later. Handle it? You sent a stranger to your mother's house demanding your father's documents? No one's demanding anything, Mom. It's just to make things faster. Isabella knows the law. She works in this field. She knows the law, but she doesn't know decency. She's been married to you for less than a week, and she's already after your father's money. It's not hers. It's mine. Thomas's voice rose. I had never heard him yell at me before. It's my right, Mom. You can't hide my father's assets forever. Hide? My throat tightened. Your father just died, Thomas. I just buried the man I loved. Can't you wait 4 months? Isabella said, a lot of widows transfer assets to avoid sharing inheritance, Mom. Isabella said. Isabella said. Isabella said. So you believe her someone you've known less than a year more than you believe your own mother? Silence. Mom, I just want what belongs to me. Then he hung up. I sat frozen on the floor as sunlight moved slowly across the room. Hours passed, and I didn't move. Finally, I stood and walked to Augusto's study, pulled out the letter he had left, and read it again word by word. One line burned off the page. Not everyone around you loves you for real. Some will. Sense the money and try to take it. He knew. God, he knew. But if Augusto had known and still tried to protect me, he must have left a way for me to protect myself. I called Richard immediately. I need to see you. Urgently. They've started. Sitting there in Augusto's office, I realized Isabella hadn't married for love. She had slithered into my family like a snake into a henhouse, and I had to find out how she learned about the money before it was too late. I tore through every drawer in Augusto's office. When Richard arrived that evening, he brought a file thicker than any I had seen. We sat in the kitchen, away from the windows, and I told him everything: the visit, the threatening letter, the way Isabella looked around my home as if it already belonged to her. She knows, Mary, Richard said. I don't know how, but she knows. But Augusto was so private. Private, yes, but not invisible. He opened the file. Augusto owned 12 gas stations, all legally registered, Anyone with access to the bank's internal system could see the accounts if they worked in the right department. I froze. Isabella works at a bank, I whispered. In the department that handles high-value estates. Richard nodded. Then she could access the financial records of any client, and Augusto had an account there. You mean she spied on my husband? I mean she exploited her access. The puzzle pieces snapped into place, the casual questions, her sudden interest in Thomas, the rushed wedding. None of it was coincidence. She didn't love my son. She loved the $5 million he would inherit. But she met Thomas before Augusto died. How could she know he was dying? Augusto had been sick for 2 years, Mary. He was under insurance treatment. Bank employees can access that information. My head spun. Isabella had hunted my son like prey. She had smelled the inheritance, and Thomas, with his grief-softened heart, was the perfect target. I need proof, I said. I have to show Thomas who she really is. Richard shook his head. That won't be easy. He's in love. Men in love are blind. But do what Augusto told you, protect what's yours, and wait for her to slip up. The greedy always trip over their own greed. The following days, I became a detective in my own home. I went through drawers, cabinets, every corner, and in one old locked drawer, I found a stack of phone bills. Dozens of calls from my home landline to the bank where Isabella worked. The dates went back 8 months right after they met, even earlier than their so-called official first meeting. I sat in Augusto's chair, hands trembling over the papers, and the truth hit me like ice water. Isabella had called my house, pretending to be a surveyor or debt collector, just to dig for information. I picked up the phone and called Thomas. No answer. I called again. The 4th time, he picked up, irritated. Mom, I'm at work. Thomas, I need to see you. Alone, it's urgent. I can't, Mom. It's about Isabella. Silence. I could hear her voice faintly in the background. Mom, please, don't start this again. Thomas, please, just this once meet me, but alone, without her. She's my wife, Mom. I don't keep secrets from her. Exactly what she'd taught him to say. He hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, a hollow numbness spreading through me, like my chest had become a dark, endless void. I had lost my husband and now I was losing my son, but I couldn't give up. I grabbed my coat and drove to the bank where Isabella worked. I walked in like any customer, took a number, and sat down. When it was my turn, I asked to speak with a manager, anyone but her. A young man with a blue tie came out, smiling politely. How can I help you, ma'am? I wanted to ask about investment options for widows. I lied. I just needed a reason to be there. He led me to a small room, poured coffee, and began explaining funds and portfolios. I nodded, pretending to listen, while my eyes drifted upstairs to the executive floor. And there she was, Isabella, walking into an office, holding a folder, her confident stride saying she owned the place. That woman, is she a manager? I asked. Oh, Isabella? Yes, she's in charge of large asset and estate clients. Why do you ask? Just curious. She seems young for that position. He smiled. Young but sharp. She has a talent for identifying high-asset clients. People say she has a special instinct for sniffing out wealth. A special instinct. I left the bank with my heart pounding. Dewey. I didn't have hard proof yet, but I knew Isabella had used her job to investigate Augusto's finances and was now using Thomas to steal what wasn't hers. When I got home, the front door was slightly open. My blood ran cold. I was certain I had locked it. I pushed it open. Everything looked normal, no mess, no break-in. But the air smelled faintly of expensive perfume, a soft floral scent, Isabella's scent. I ran to Augusto's office. The drawer where I'd kept the phone bills was wide open. They were gone. She had been in my house, touched my things, taken my evidence. I sank to the floor, clutching the bronze box to my chest. For the first time since Augusto died, I felt real fear. It wasn't just greed anymore, it was threat. Isabella was always one step ahead. If I didn't act fast, I'd lose everything. But she had no idea I had already started my own plan. And soon, she would learn that underestimating a widow was the biggest mistake of her life. I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. Friday morning, the phone rang. A sweet, almost friendly voice. "Hello, Mrs. Mary. How are you?" It was Isabella. I gripped the phone tightly. "What do you want?" "Oh, don't sound so tense. I wanted to invite you to lunch tomorrow. Family only. Nothing formal." "Family?" I repeated. In her mouth, the words sounded like honey laced with poison. "Thomas wants you to come. And there are a few inheritance details we can discuss. It's always better to resolve things within the family, right?" I knew it was a trap. But refusing would only give her an excuse to say I was being difficult. "What time?" "Noon." "Let me give you the address." It was a 3-bedroom apartment in a new luxury complex. I wondered how a newly married bank employee could afford that. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I wore the navy blue suit Augusto once called elegant, pinned up my hair neatly, and put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. Before leaving, I touched the bronze box and whispered to his picture, "Give me strength." The building was immaculate, tight security, manicured gardens, polished elevators. The kind of place Augusto and I once dreamed of but never bought. He preferred investing in business, while I invested in family. I rang the bell at apartment 1504. Isabella opened the door, smiling brightly. "Mrs. Mary, right on time. Come in." The apartment was perfect, modern decor, glossy floors, heavy drapes, abstract paintings, and the faint smell of food cooked or made to smell that way. In the living room, Thomas sat looking weary. Susan, Isabella's mother, sat upright on the sofa like a queen. Beside her was a woman in her 40s with short hair, a black blazer, and a leather folder. My heart sank. "Mrs. Mary, this is my cousin Veronica. She's a family lawyer," Isabella said. I sat where she pointed, strategically positioned, so the light hit straight into my eyes. She served lasagna, rice, and salad arranged like a magazine spread. Thomas stayed quiet, barely touching his plate. Then Susan spoke first. "Isabella tells me you still haven't filed the inheritance. Paperwork." "It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. My lawyer is handling it." "Oh, Mr. Richard, right?" Isabella glanced at her cousin. "He's a bit old-fashioned. Works the slow way. He was my husband's personal lawyer for over 30 years. I trust him." Susan smirked. "Trust is fine, but the law is the law, Mrs. Mary. Thomas has a right to his share. You can't keep everything just because you want control." I clenched my fists. "I'm not keeping anything. Everything will be handled properly." "Properly but delayed," Veronica cut in, her tone cold as steel. "Under our state's rules in cases like this, the estate is typically divided between the widow and the son. The longer you delay, the messier it gets." I looked at Thomas, the boy I had carried, raised, taught, and now a man letting strangers corner his mother. "Do you agree with this?" Do you agree to sit here and let them gang up on me?" He lifted his head, eyes red and tired. "Mom, I just want my share." "Your share?" My voice broke. "Do you really think I'm hiding something from you?" Isabella placed her hand on his. "Mrs. Mary, everyone knows Mr. Augusto left more than you've said. The gas stations, the properties, the investments, they're all on record. We just want to follow the law." "You say we?" I stared straight at her. "Or do you mean you, Isabella?" The air thickened. Susan leaned forward, voice sharp. "Mrs. Mary, I say this as a mother. You've lived your life. You had your husband, your child, his money. Now it's Thomas's turn. He deserves his own life. You're clinging to that money like a queen on her throne. That's selfish." Each word cut like glass. "Selfish," I snapped, "is marrying for money." Isabella's face went pale. Veronica frowned, and Susan shot to her feet. "What did you just say?" You heard me," I said, staring right at Isabella. I went after my son, because you knew about the inheritance. You used your job at the bank to dig into his finances, and now you're pretending this is a family discussion." Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, Mom. Isabella loves me." "She loves you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You've known her less than a year. You married right after your father's death. And now you're sitting here with lawyers demanding money she has no right to." "It's mine," Thomas shouted. "It's my right, and you can't keep it forever." Something inside me cracked. I looked at my son, the child I once rocked to sleep, wiped tears for, devoted my life to, and all I saw was a stranger. Isabella stood, fixing her hair, regaining composure. "Mrs. Mary, you should leave. This lunch was a mistake. I thought we could speak civilly, but you've chosen another path." "What path?" "Court." Veronica opened her folder and pulled out documents. "If you don't, to provide all the required files by the end of the week, we'll sue you for concealing assets. And when that happens, the court can seize everything, including this house." The house, the place where I had lived with Augusto, where every corner still held memories. I stood up, my legs trembling but my back straight. "You'll all regret this." Isabella smiled coldly. "No, Mrs. Mary. You'll be the one to regret being so stubborn." I left the apartment with my head held high, but as the elevator doors closed, I collapsed and cried uncontrollably. I cried for Thomas's betrayal, for the humiliation, for the crushing feeling of being completely alone. When I got home, I locked the door, sat in Augusto's study, and held the bronze box tightly to my chest. "I can't take this anymore, my love." But in that moment, at the lowest point of despair, something in me changed. My tears dried, replaced by anger, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that burns with clarity. They thought they had broken me, but all they did was wake me up. That night, alone in the silent house, I made a decision. No more crying, no more enduring. If they wanted a war, I would teach them a lesson they would never forget. I wouldn't shout or act recklessly. I would do what Augusto always did: stay calm, think clearly, and wait for the right moment. I washed my face, took a deep breath, and reopened his letter. I read every word, every period, and felt as though he were right there beside me, saying, "Protect what we built. Not everyone deserves it. Trust Richard and your instincts. You're stronger than you think." I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Richard. It was almost 10 p.m., but he answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Mary, are you all right?" "Not exactly, but I will be." My voice sounded different, calm, firm. "Come to my house early tomorrow. I have a plan, and I need you to tell me if it's possible." Sunday morning, exactly at 7 a.m. Richard arrived with his usual thermos of coffee and leather briefcase. We sat in the kitchen, the place where every major decision of my life had been made. And this would be another one. "Tell me what happened," he said. I told him everything: the lunch, the insults, the threats. The way they surrounded me made me feel like prey. When I finished, Richard took off his glasses and rubbed his face heavily. "Mrs. Mary, I'll be honest. They can really sue you. If they do, it will be long, exhausting, and expensive. I know." He opened his briefcase and pulled out Augusto's will. "But there's something they don't know, something he prepared for exactly this situation." My heart pounded. "What is it?" "A protective clause," he said, pointing to Section 5 of the document. Augusto anticipated that someone might approach Thomas for his money, especially after he passed, when the boy would be vulnerable. So he added a condition. Richard turned the document toward me, pointing at the key passage. I read it once, twice, 3 times. "It's exactly what Augusto wrote," Richard said. "Your husband legally protected you and limited Thomas's share if money ever came before integrity." A chill ran down my spine. Augusto had known. He understood better than anyone. "He was a smart man," Richard said softly, "and he loved you enough not to leave you unprotected." He closed the briefcase. "But there's one problem. We need to prove Isabella married for money. Suspicion isn't enough. We need evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents, recordings, witnesses, anything that proves she knew about the assets before meeting Thomas. That it was a plan, not love." I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. I used to have phone records showing she called my house before meeting Thomas, but she broke in and took them. "We can request copies." "Those records are stored for R." Richard paused, his eyes lighting up slightly. I opened a drawer and took out my phone. Before that lunch yesterday, I installed a recording app. Every threat, every word of pressure, it's all here. Even her mother saying I've lived long enough and should hand over the money. Richard looked at me with surprise and admiration. "You're smarter than I thought." "I learned from the best. We spent the entire day planning." He explained the clause in detail, guided me on what to do next, and, most importantly, taught me to wait. "Greedy people always rush," he said. "She'll make a mistake, and when she does, we'll be ready." The next morning, I called Isabella. I faked a weak, tired tone. "Isabella, it's Mrs. Mary." Her voice came sharp, full of smug confidence. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" "I have. You're right. I'm old. I'm tired, and I don't want to fight with my son anymore." Every word hurt, but I kept going. "I'll have Richard prepare the papers, but it'll take about 2 weeks. There's a lot of paperwork. 2 weeks is too long. That's how long I need, unless you want me to die from stress and leave Thomas without both parents." She went silent for a few seconds, calculating. "Fine, 2 weeks, but no delays." "I won't delay." When I hung up, Richard smiled. "You've bought us time. Now let's use it." In the following days, I turned my house into a fortress. I installed tiny cameras in the living room, hallway, and entryway, hidden as smoke detectors. If Isabella came back, I'd have proof. I changed all passwords, locked my documents in a new safe, and began doing something I had never done before: investigating. I went to the county records office and looked up ownership of Isabella's apartment. It had been purchased 4 months earlier, paid in cash around $890,000. 4 months ago, Augusto was still alive. How could a bank employee afford nearly $1 million? I hired a private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Martha, with short hair and a no-nonsense tone. I handed her Isabella's photo. I need to know everything, past debts, old relationships, everything. Martha studied the photo and said, "It'll be expensive." "I don't care. And it'll take time. I have 2 weeks." She gave a small smile. "You remind me of my mother, quiet, but unstoppable once she made up her mind. Leave it to me." While Martha worked, I did my part. I went back to the bank where Isabella worked, saying I wanted to invest part of my inheritance. Not a complete lie. I asked to speak with someone else, anyone but her. The same young man from before Rodrigo, blue tie, friendly smile came out. "Back again, ma'am? Thinking of investing for real this time?" "I'm considering it, but I wanted to ask something." I lowered my brained voice. "That manager Isabella, is she trustworthy?" Rodrigo hesitated. "Trustworthy? Well, she's efficient." "How efficient?" He glanced around, then leaned closer. "Between us, she's worked at 3 different banks over 5 years, all in the same department, and she always leaves right after a few high-value clients finish big transactions." "Transactions?" "Usually inheritance or estate transfers. Some say she uses insider information, but no one's ever proven it." I left the bank with my heart pounding. I was right. Isabella was a professional predator, and my son was just her next victim. When I got home, there was a message from Martha. "I've got something. Come see me now." What Martha discovered changed everything. I arrived at her office that gray Tuesday afternoon. The room was small, papers stacked everywhere, 2 hard chairs. Martha was typing when she turned the screen toward me. "Sit down, Mary. You'll need to stay." Calm. On the screen were dozens of photos: Isabella dining in fancy restaurants with different men, Isabella entering a notary office, Isabella appearing at a funeral. "What is this?" Martha lit a cigarette, ignoring the no-smoking sign in front of her. Isabella Clark, 28, business major, worked at 4 banks in 6 years, always in the high-asset department. She clicked to another tab. And in every bank, she got involved with a client or the client's son right before an inheritance. I shuddered. How many? 3. Before Thomas. The first was a 60-year-old businessman, recently widowed, heir to a supermarket chain. They got engaged. 3 months later, he transferred $1.2 million to her. Then she broke it off, saying she wasn't ready for marriage. Oh my God. The second was the son of a gas station owner. She dated him 6 months, got access to the family's documents. When his father died, she convinced him to sue his siblings. The family fell apart. She walked away with $400,000 labeled as a consulting fee. And the third? They married. The marriage lasted a few months. Once the inheritance was settled, he received $3 million. She divorced him and took half. $1.5 million, clean. I stared at the photos, the beautiful, cold, calculating face, and realized my son was just her next target. Is there more? Martha opened a folder and spread documents across the desk. Her apartment was paid for with money from that divorce, but it's under her mother's name, Susan, to avoid detection if she marries again. She handed me a printed screenshot of a WhatsApp message. I got this from a private source. Read it. I read. Found a guy who's an only child. His father's dying. Assets over 5 million. Best catch so far. Gotta be careful. He's naive, fragile because his dad's sick. Easy one, Thomas. She was talking about my son, calling him naive. Easy. My throat closed up. Mrs. Mary, are you okay? Want some water? Martha asked. I didn't answer. I just stared at that last sentence, easy one. Martha put a hand on my shoulder. I know it's hard to accept, but now you have real proof. We can use it. I gathered the documents, thanked her, paid in full, and even added a bonus, then drove home in a daze. When I arrived, a familiar car was parked outside Thomas's. My heart pounded. Maybe he finally understood. But when I entered the house, I realized he hadn't come alone. Sitting in my living room was Isabella's lawyer, David Collins. Thomas stood beside him, not with her, but with a stiff, cold expression. Thomas, what's going on? I asked. He stood up, his suit perfectly pressed, his tone firm. Mom, I tried to handle this peacefully. You wouldn't cooperate, so now we have to do it another way. David opened his briefcase and laid documents on the table. Mrs. Mary, this is an official court summons. Your son has filed for an emergency inheritance proceeding, accusing you of hiding assets and obstructing a legal heir. Those words struck like thunder. I looked at Thomas, barely breathing. What are you doing? You're suing your own mother? I had no choice. You're hiding everything that belonged to Dad, and I just want my share. I'm not hiding anything, Thomas. I'm protecting you. Protecting me from what? He gave a cold laugh. Are you jealous of Isabella? You can't stand that I have a wife and a life of my own, so you're punishing me? It felt like a punch to the chest. How dare you say that to me? David stood, adjusting his jacket. Mrs. Mary, the first hearing will be in 15 days. You should hire a good lawyer, David said coolly. Because what we have against you is solid. Then they walked out. Thomas didn't even look back. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the paper trembling in my hand, feeling the world collapse around me for the second time. My son, the child I carried and raised, was suing his own mother. But the worst was yet to come. By Thursday, I started noticing the looks. The neighbor who used to greet me every morning suddenly turned away. The baker avoided eye contact. The pharmacist whispered to her coworker. At the supermarket, near the dairy aisle, I overheard two women talking. One of them lived just 2 streets from me. That's Mrs. Mary, right? Yeah. Heard she's hiding money from her son. Poor guy just got married and wants to start a new life, but she won't share a dime. Over $5 million, they say. I don't believe that. It's true. His wife told people everywhere, said Mrs. Mary's moving her money overseas so he gets nothing. My vision blurred. Isabella had spread rumors, destroying my reputation across the neighborhood. I abandoned my cart and rushed to the parking lot, clinging to my car so I wouldn't collapse. Everyone now looked at me like I was greedy, a cruel mother hoarding money from her own child. When I got home, I heard 3 messages in my voicemail box. The first was from a woman I knew from church. Mary, I don't know if the rumors are true, but if they are, you should be ashamed. A child is still your child. The second was from a distant relative. I don't want to interfere, but Thomas is a good boy. You can't treat him that way. The third didn't have a name. Selfish old woman, keeping money that isn't yours. God is watching you. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. For the first time in this entire battle, I wanted to give up, to disappear. because now it wasn't just Isabella or Thomas, it felt like the whole world had turned against me. I took the bronze box and opened it. Inside was Augusto's photo. He smiled softly, as if saying, "You're stronger than you think." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the last time in this war, I allowed myself to cry. I cried for the betrayal, for the loneliness, for the son I'd lost to a lie. When the last tears dried, all that remained in me was anger, pure, sharp, liberating anger. I stood up, washed my face, wiped it dry, and called Richard. "Richard, they've sued me. They're spreading lies everywhere. They want to destroy me." "I know," he replied calmly. "I received the summons. So tell me, can we win?" A short silence, then his firm voice. "Mary, we won't just win, we'll crush her." In that moment, my heart broke, but my mind was crystal clear. If Isabella wanted to drag me into hell, I would drag her right along with me. And when the dust settled, only one of us would still be standing. The day of the hearing, I walked in with a briefcase and changed everything. For 2 weeks before that, I'd prepared like a general before a battle. Richard worked day and night. Martha gathered more evidence. And I became someone even I barely recognized, cold, precise, relentless. The night before the trial, I didn't sleep. I sat in Augusto's chair, holding the bronze box, reviewing every part of the plan, every document, every word I would say. At 5 a.m., I showered, put on a charcoal gray suit, black heels, tied my hair neatly, and wore the pearl earrings Augusto had given me. I was no longer a fragile widow that day. I would walk into court as a woman who knew her worth. At 7:30, Richard picked me up. In the car, he reminded me one last time. When the judge asks if you want to settle, you just say, "No, I want to present my evidence." Don't cry, don't lose control. Stay steady, I'll handle the rest. We arrived at the courthouse. The hallway smelled of old paper and reheated coffee. I saw Thomas from a distance, sitting beside Isabella. She looked perfect. As always, navy business dress, pointed heels, sleek hair, flawless makeup. Beside her sat David Collins and 2 others, clearly reinforcements. When she saw me, Isabella leaned toward Thomas and whispered something. He glanced at me briefly, then quickly turned away. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or shame. The session began. The judge, Marion Hayes, was around 50, with gray-streaked hair and a steady, serious gaze. "The mediation hearing regarding the estate of Mr. Augusto Bennett is now in session," she said. "Our goal is to reach an agreement. Mrs. Mary, are you willing to negotiate?" I looked at Richard. He gave a small nod. "No, Your Honor." Isabella rolled her eyes. Thomas sighed. "All right, then let's hear both sides." David stood, opening a thick folder. "Your Honor, my client, Thomas Bennett, the deceased's only son, is being denied access to his rightful inheritance. Mrs. Mary refuses to disclose information and shows clear signs of hiding assets. We ask the court to compel her to submit the full inventory, or permission to speak, Your Honor," Richard interrupted, his tone calm but commanding. "Before we proceed with baseless accusations, I'd like to present several documents that clarify this case." "Proceed," the judge said. Richard opened his briefcase and laid out each document on the table like a deck of cards. First, the official will of Mr. Augusto Bennett, notarized 3 months before his death. Mrs. Mary has hidden nothing. As clearly stated, she is the sole person authorized to manage all assets. Thomas frowned. Isabella's face went pale. Second, Richard continued, the protective clause. If my son marries within 2 years of my death to someone with financial motives, he will receive only 8% of the inheritance until he turns 40. The remainder shall remain under the lifetime management of my wife, Mary Bennett. The room went silent. Thomas turned toward Isabella, whose face was rigid, her jaw clenched. Ridiculous, David protested. That clause violates inheritance rights. Completely legal, Richard replied firmly. Properly notarized, the testator has full right to protect his estate. He paused, meeting Isabella's eyes. And that clause only applies if there's proof of financial intent. We have that proof. Isabella's world began to crumble. Richard placed a stack of photos on the table, dozens of them. Isabella, with various men at restaurants, at notary offices, at funerals. In the past 6 years, he said, Isabella Clark has been involved with 4 men, all heirs or soon-to-be heirs of major estates. In every case, she ended the relationship right after gaining access to their assets. Lies, Isabella shouted. Sit down, the judge ordered sharply. Isabella trembled as she obeyed. Richard went on. The first case, Michael Harris, 60 years old. He transferred $1.2 million to her before she dumped him. The second, Daniel Moore. She convinced him to sue his family and walked away with $400,000 labeled as a consulting fee. The third, Jason Miller. She married him, divorced after 8 months, and took $1.5 million. Thomas's face turned white. He looked at Isabella. Isabella, is that true? She said nothing. And there's more, Richard continued, placing printed screenshots on the table. Messages between the defendant and another person. 7 months ago. He read aloud a message where Isabella described Thomas as an easy target, an only child with a dying father, and more than $5 million at stake. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, then jumped to his feet. Enough. He turned to Isabella. You used me? It's not what you think. Don't touch me. He shoved her hand away so hard she nearly fell. You lied about everything. You destroyed my relationship with my mother for money. He turned to me, eyes full of remorse. Mom, God, what have I done? I wanted to go to him, but Richard placed a hand on mine. Not yet, he whispered. The judge struck her gavel. Any further evidence? Yes, Your Honor, Richard said, pulling out a phone. An audio recording from a meeting at Miss Isabella's home 2 weeks ago, where she and her family threatened Mrs. Mary to hand over the assets. The recording filled the room. Susan's voice, Isabella's mother. You've lived long enough, lady. It's time for Thomas to get his share. Keeping everything is selfish. Then Isabella's voice followed. When I get that money, I'll leave this guy and move to Europe. The room fell into dead silence. Thomas buried his head in his hands. Isabella sat frozen, pale as a ghost. These recordings could be edited, David began. They've been verified and notarized, Richard cut in. Completely legal and admissible. The judge gathered the documents, set them down, and struck the gavel again. It is clear that Miss Isabella Clark acted with deceit, manipulation, and clear financial intent. The protective clause in Mr. Augusto Bennett's will is valid. Thomas Bennett shall receive only 8% of the inheritance until he reaches 40. The remainder shall remain under the lifetime management of Mrs. Mary Bennett. Case closed. Isabella jumped up, her eyes blazing. You set me up. This is a conspiracy. I rose, meeting her gaze. I didn't set you up, Isabella. I just let you show who you really are." She lunged forward, but David caught her. "Let's go." They stumbled out, Isabella shouting while he tried to pull her away. Only Richard, Thomas, and I remained. Thomas sat with his head in his hands, sobbing. "Mom, please forgive me. I'm sorry." Looking at my broken son, I knew justice had been served. But forgiveness was something only I could decide to give. When I saw Isabella's face that day, I knew every tear I had shed was worth it. But when I looked at my son, his face shattered, sitting still on that cold courtroom chair, my heart ached in a way no betrayal ever had. Richard gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "You two should talk privately. I'll wait outside." He closed the door softly behind him. It was just Thomas and me, mother and son, separated by a table that suddenly felt like a canyon. He didn't dare look at me, just wiped his tears with the back of his hand, the same way he did as a little boy whenever he fell off his bike. The sight pierced my heart. I moved to sit beside him, not across beside him, where mothers belong, Thomas. He lifted his head, eyes red, filled with remorse. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't even know where to start." "Then don't start with an apology. Tell me this. When did you stop believing me?" He swallowed, hard, his voice breaking. "She was convincing, Mom. She made me believe you were hiding things, that you wanted everything for yourself. And I believed her. I believed her more than the woman who raised me alone after Dad died, the woman who never denied me anything. Why? Because it was easier," he said bitterly. "Easier than admitting I was a fool, easier than facing that I'd been manipulated, that I chose someone I barely knew over the person who's always been there for me." We sat in silence. Footsteps and doors echoed faintly from the hallway outside. I said quietly, "Your father knew, Thomas." He looked up. "Knew what?" "He knew this could happen. Because he was smart. Because he knew you. And because he knew that after he was gone, you'd be vulnerable, easy to influence. People like Isabella can smell weakness the way sharks smell blood." Thomas lowered his gaze. "Dad must be so disappointed." I took his cold hand in mine. "No. He'd be proud that you finally saw the truth before it was too late." He gripped my hand tightly. "I sued you, called you selfish, accused you of stealing. How can you ever forgive me?" I took a deep breath. "Because you're my son. A mother's love isn't logical. It doesn't count. It doesn't measure. It doesn't end." I wiped a tear from his cheek. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We'll have to rebuild brick by brick, piece by piece. I'll do whatever it takes. It won't be easy, Thomas. And it won't be quick." He nodded, struggling to hold back tears. "What about Isabella?" "You already know what you have to do. I'm going to divorce her." That's exactly what I was going to say. We left the courthouse together. The sky was bright blue, warm sunlight pouring down as if the world hadn't changed at all. But for us, everything had. Richard leaned against his car, a cigarette in hand even, though he had promised to quit long ago. "You all right?" "I am now," I said, looking at him with deep gratitude. "Thank you, Richard. Augusto once made me promise to protect you and your son. I just kept my word." On the drive home, Thomas held my hand the entire time, as if afraid that letting go would make me disappear. I understood that feeling because during those weeks of fighting, I had lost him once too. When we finally arrived home, the house I had almost lost, I brewed a pot of strong coffee, the kind Augusto always loved. We sat in the kitchen, the place that had witnessed so many of our life's biggest decisions. "What's going to happen to Isabella now?" Thomas asked, stirring his cup. "Legally, Nothing. She didn't commit a crime. Everything she did was technically within the law, but she won't escape the consequences. I took a sip of coffee. The evidence Richard submitted will remain on record forever. Anyone who looks up her name will find it. Her bank has likely been notified. Her reputation is gone. And reputation, Thomas, is sometimes worth more than money. The following week, Isabella called me 6 times. I didn't answer. On the 7th, she left a message. Mrs. Mary, you destroyed me. I lost my job, my friends, everything. Are you happy now? I deleted it without listening to the rest. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. Isabella had filed herself no demands for money, no claims to property. She just wanted to vanish from Thomas's life as fast as possible. She gave up, Thomas said, stunned. People like her stay only when there's something to gain. The process was finalized in 45 days, a record. During that time, Thomas started therapy twice a week. He needed to understand how he'd been manipulated so it would never happen again. As for me, I kept living but differently, stronger, clearer, and finally aware of my own worth. A month after the trial, Thomas came to me. Mom, I want to work at Dad's company. I want to learn from the ground up, not to inherit it, but to deserve it. I looked at him and saw the man I'd always believed he could become. All right, but no privileges, no high position. You'll start in administration, salary like everyone else. I agree. And he did. The next week, Thomas arrived at 7 a.m., left at 6, worked hard, made mistakes, learned, and improved. 3 months later, one evening he showed up at my house with a food container. I cooked. Will you eat with me? We ate, talked, and laughed for the first time since Augusto passed away. As we cleared the dishes, I looked at the bronze box on the table and whispered, "We did it, my love." 6 months later, I ran into Isabella at the supermarket. She was unrecognizable, messy hair, worn clothes, no makeup, pushing a cart full of clearance items. Our eyes met. She stopped, took a deep breath, and walked over. Mrs. Mary. Isabella. A heavy silence hung between us. I just wanted to say, you were right, about everything. I stayed silent. All my life, I thought money was the answer. That if I had enough, I'd be happy. I'd matter. But now I've lost everything, and I see I never had anything real, not love, not genuine connections, only calculations. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know you won. Not just in court, but in life. You have a son who loves you, real memories, real love. And me, I only had money in the bank, and now I have no one. She turned, pushed her cart down the aisle, and disappeared among the shelves. I felt no pity, no anger, only emptiness. Because Isabella was no longer part of my story, just a closed chapter. Standing in the middle of the supermarket, shopping list in hand, I realized something I'd never understood before. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone, it's living so well that they recognize what they've lost. Isabella lost everything, but I got my son back, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. Half a year later, I understood that justice isn't about retaliation, it's about protection. When spring came, I decided to do something I had been planning for months. On a Saturday morning, I got up early, dressed simply, and went to Augusto's old office. The bronze box was still on the wooden desk where he used to work. I picked it up, felt its familiar warmth, opened it, and looked at the photo of us young and full of hope. "Today I'll do what you wanted," I whispered. Thomas came into the kitchen not long after, hair messy, still in his pajamas. "Good morning, Mom." "Good morning, son. I have something to do today. Will you come with me?" "Where to?" "You'll see." We drove about 40 minutes to the area where Augusto once owned 2 gas stations, but I didn't stop there. Instead, I parked in front of a large empty lot with a faded "For Sale" sign. Thomas frowned. "Why did you bring me here?" "Let me tell you a story." I leaned against the hood of the car, gazing over the wide stretch of land. "Before he died, your father told me that his biggest regret wasn't not making more money, it was not helping more people. He said we spend our lives accumulating wealth, hoarding money, and forget that we can't take any of it with us. What remains are the lives we've touched." Thomas listened intently. I took a deep breath. "I'm going to buy this land and build the Augusto Bennett Widow Support Center." Thomas's eyes widened. "A center, Mom?" "Yes," I said. "A place where widows can receive free legal aid, protection from family manipulation, and guidance on inheritance and property rights. Everything I once needed but that so few women ever get." He stayed quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Mom, that'll cost a lot of money." I said, meeting his eyes, "and I want to use that very money for this." I took another breath, my voice steady. "You know, I've been through the hell of being a widow turned into a target. I was lucky to have Richard, to have resources and protection, but how many women out there have no one? How many lose everything simply because they don't know how to protect themselves?" Thomas rubbed his face, then suddenly laughed, not mockingly, but with relief and pride. "You're incredible, you know that?" "Experience did that," I replied. "When will you start?" "As soon as the paperwork is done, probably in about 3 months." He looked out over the land, imagining what it could become. "Can I help?" "Yes, but not with money, with effort. I want you to manage the administrative department for the first 6 months. Volunteer work, no pay." "I agree." We hugged for real, the first genuine embrace since Isabella entered our lives. The following months were a whirlwind of effort. I bought the land, hired architects, and planned every detail. The center would have counseling rooms, a legal library, a conference hall, and a shared space for support groups. A safe place, a true haven. Thomas poured his heart into it, working harder than ever. He made spreadsheets, managed files, coordinated contractors, and came home every night to have dinner with me, updating me on progress. Today I signed contracts with 3 lawyers who'll provide free consultations twice a week. Today I secured donated furniture from an office that shut down. Today a woman called asking when the center will open. She lost her husband last month, and her in-laws are forcing her to sell her house. Each story reaffirmed that this place needed to exist. 7 months after the trial, the Augusto Bennett Widow Support Center officially opened. The ceremony was simple, just me, Thomas, Richard, a few staff members, and 3 women who were our first beneficiaries. No fancy party, no long speeches, just a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "In memory of Augusto Bennett, a man who built wealth but left a legacy." As evening fell and everyone had gone home, I stayed alone in the main hall. I placed the bronze box on the reception counter. It would stay there forever, reminding everyone that this place was born out of love, protection, and hard-learned lessons. "You'd be proud of us," I whispered. The pain of the past had turned into purpose. Thomas appeared at the doorway, leaning against the wooden frame. "Thinking about Dad. When am I not?" "One." He came and sat beside me. Mom, I want to thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. You fought not just for the money, but for me, for the person I could become. He squeezed my hand. Isabella broke me, but you helped me stand again. No, son, you rebuilt yourself. I just held your hand while you learned to walk again. We sat in silence, looking around the space that had been born from my darkest days and was now a symbol of hope. A year later, the center had helped 143 women. Some managed to keep their homes, some discovered they were entitled to inheritances they never knew existed, and many simply found a place where they could cry without judgment and learn how to be strong again. One afternoon, a woman around 70 walked in. Her hair was silver, her hands trembling, her eyes lost. Thomas greeted her personally. Later he told me, "Mom, her story is just like yours once was. Her husband passed away, her son married quickly, and now the daughter-in-law is forcing her to sign over everything." My heart clenched. What did you do? I followed protocol. Told her to bring the documents, then we'll have Richard review the will. I also enrolled her in next week's support group. I looked at my son, filled with pride. You've learned well. I learned from you. 2 years later, on a cold morning in early July, I woke up with a strange feeling. Not joy, peace. The kind that comes when you know you've done everything you could with what life gave you. By then, Thomas had moved into his own apartment, bought with his own salary, not inheritance. He still visited me 3 times a week and had lunch with me every Sunday. Our conversations were no longer about money or lawsuits, they were about football, cooking, plans, and dreams. He had started dating a teacher he met at one of the center's workshops. She was simple, loved books, loved dogs, and cared nothing for wealth. That day, Thomas brought her home, looking shy like a teenager. "Mom, this is Amanda." I looked at the young woman with the kind smile and honest eyes, free of calculation. "It's lovely to meet you, Amanda." "Same here, Mrs. Mary. Thomas talks about you so much that I feel like I already know you." During that lunch, as I watched them laugh and share soft glances, I understood that my son had finally learned the most important lesson. The true value of life isn't measured in money. That evening, alone in Augusto's old office, I turned on the desk lamp and opened the bronze box. I didn't cry. I smiled. "You were right, my love. I am stronger than I thought." I gently closed the lid, running my hand over the carved grapevines on the metal surface. "You left me more than money, Augusto. You left me pride, strength, and the faith that I am enough with or without anyone beside me." That night, I slept in complete peace, not as the widow who once fell apart, but as a woman who had rediscovered her worth. If you've listened this far, I just want to ask, how many times in your life have you mistaken love for control? How many times have you given away your peace, your dignity, and your value to someone who didn't deserve it? I almost lost everything, my son, my home, and my sanity, but I learned the most important truth. The greatest wealth in life isn't in a bank account, but in the ability to rise after falling and to protect what's yours without losing yourself. Isabella taught me about greed. Thomas taught me about forgiveness. And Augusto, he taught me that real love protects you, even from afar. If this story touched you, if you've been through something similar, or know someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Share your story, because when we share our pain, the weight becomes lighter. And if you want to keep hearing real stories of resilience, struggle, and women who refuse to be erased, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, I'll tell you stories that will make you think, feel, and most importantly, remind you that you are far stronger than you believe.